Yeah, so I'm really excited to be here, especially because I was listening, I caught the tail end of that last panel, and hopefully what I'm going to talk about will answer some of your questions and give you some thoughts on some things we're doing in the area here in Billings to try to address some of these issues that were brought up during the last panel. So Jeannie already talked about the mission of the Yellowstone Valley Citizens Council. The Community Food Campaign, of which I am a chair, is a committee of that council, and our mission is to foster the culture of local foods in our community by raising awareness about the important role that local foods play in sustaining the vitality of the Yellowstone Valley. So anybody here who is really interested in these issues of local food, and especially the piece, somebody brought up the issue of culture and how do we get people aware of these things, that's something we talk about during our monthly meetings in the Community Food Campaign. So come and join us if you're interested in that. So I think from the last panel you're already familiar with some of what we grow in this area, root crops especially. I heard them talking about pulse crops, which are a super nutrient dense food that is cheap, affordable for anybody at any income level, and also very healthy. And I think these might be pictures of Jeannie's. So our question on the Community Food Campaign is how do we get all these wonderful local foods onto more local plates and get people interested in actually eating that food? So that's our drive, that's what we're trying to figure out. And so we have come up with this idea that's not our idea. We took it from places around the country that have created local food hubs, which are facilities that help to aggregate, store, and distribute local foods. And so because we know that a lot of our local producers operate on a smaller scale, they don't have the sort of supply alone that, for example, could supply a restaurant throughout the summer and winter. So there's not one grower who's going to have enough onions and enough carrots and enough beef and so on to supply a restaurant. So what we need to do is have a place where all of the producers in our area can come and bring their produce, and then we can aggregate it into greater quantities and then distribute it so that local food becomes more competitive with some of the larger scale producers that are often coming from out of state. So what we're working on is we've conducted a feasibility study to look at some of the issues. Can this work in Billings? Is there a market for it? Are there enough producers? Is there enough interest? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that feasibility study and what our next steps are going to be. So here are why a food hub? I think probably everybody in this room at this point, if you've been listening to the presentation so far, has an idea of why we would need a food hub. But some interesting statistics, currently less than 10% of the food that we eat in Montana is produced here. So most of the food you're buying at the grocery store and eating at a restaurant in your cafeterias is from out of state, and a lot of it also from out of the country. So even 99% of our beef is shipped out of state for processing. So we may have 3 head of cattle for every person in Montana, but most of the cattle we're eating is either raised somewhere else, or if it was raised here, it was first shipped to Nebraska or South Dakota or Kansas, sat on a feedlot, fattened up, slaughtered, and then shipped back here. So we have this unsustainable system where a lot of extra transportation miles are put in. And so approximately 75% of ag products undergo some sort of processing before they reach the consumer. Most of us, especially in this modern, fast-paced age, are looking for products that are at least somewhat processed and pre-prepared. Most consumers aren't buying the raw product, they're buying it in some sort of processed form. And so a lot of the dollars that go into the food industry comes from processing. And we do very little processing in Montana, so we're losing a lot of our dollars to out-of-state facilities that are doing that processing. A study conducted by NCAT found that a 10% increase, or predicted that a 10% increase in purchasing of Montana-produced food by Montana institutions, so that's institutions that receive any sort of public support from the state of Montana, would bring an estimated $5 million directly into the state's economy. Right now, we have one entity that is similar to a food hub. It doesn't call itself a food hub, but the Mission Mountain Food Enterprise Center in Ronan, which Trevor may have alluded to, I'm not sure, do I see some files? Okay, so I won't go into that in detail then since my time is limited. But there's one center that does a lot of processing and distributing of local foods to help get it into the market. And so this is the model that we first started looking at here to try to replicate around here, have a place where we could not just store, but also eventually process some foods into those forms that the institutions are looking for, washed, chopped, bagged, ready to throw in a salad bar, for example. So we'd like to do that here in Billings to capture some of those food dollars that are leaving the state. So we've come up with a tentative mission statement for this food hub that we'd like to get going, to facilitate the movement of local foods from farm to fork so that consumers, institutions, and distributors make it their first choice. So that's what we're aiming to do. In our feasibility study, I'm the one who conducted most of that study with the help of a lot of Northern Plains staff members. So I talked with a lot of producers in the area, with restaurants, I talked with MSU Billings, with Cisco, with some of the schools. We were trying to get an idea of what the demand is, what the need is, and what the interest is. So producers are definitely interested. They don't like having to do a lot of the marketing themselves. They don't like looking for the market by themselves and going door to door to every restaurant and every institution in Billings to see if somebody wants to buy their food. They don't have time for that. They don't have interest in doing that. They want to grow their product and sell it and bring it to one place in Billings that would then take care of moving it into the market. A lot of the producers that I met with also expressed an interest for that value-added processing that I talked about, so that they can capture more of the dollars, keep it in the state, keep it for themselves, and then use it to purchase their supplies and expand their own businesses. Institutions such as MSU Billings, some larger distributors such as Cisco are also very interested in this idea, and they really would like to buy more local food, but they need us to scale up. So that, like I mentioned before, having a food hub that could aggregate local produce so that it's in large enough quantities to satisfy those markets is a necessary first step. And we'd also have to work towards maintaining a consistent and adequate supply, because the larger institutions and distributors don't want to deal with multiple entities if they don't have to. They want one or two suppliers, and so if the food hub can scale up to meet that supply, they would be interested in purchasing from us. And they also are interested in that value-added processing because they like the pre-prepared product. And then we did a consumer survey that generated just under 300 responses. And so we were pleasantly surprised to find that most of the responses in that survey, most of the respondents indicated that it wasn't pricing so much that was an issue, but availability. People didn't know where to find local food, and not everybody can make it to one of the best locations for local food, which is the Good Earth Market. That's downtown. A lot of folks live and work on the West End and don't make it into town as often. So they were looking for more local food to be available at places like Albertsons. Lucky's does okay, but they could do better. And I met with Lucky's, and they want to do better, but again, we need to be able to scale up and help facilitate some of those connections between producers and the larger grocers and markets in the area. So there's definitely a lot of interest and momentum behind this. I didn't meet a single person who said this is a bad idea, it's not going to work. Everybody thought it could work as long as there's careful thought put into it. And so I'm going to gloss over this a little just because I think I'm running out of time, and I want to talk about where we're going to go with this. The next step is going to be to complete a business plan. So what I did was kind of get some of the general interest in this, figure out what everybody's general needs are, and so the next step will be to come up with a more specific business plan that pins down some of the numbers and pricing, quantity, what's a facility going to cost, and we have some potential facilities in the area that we're looking at, and so just pinning down some details so that we can move forward with some more information. We also we're going to look into some funding opportunities. There are plenty of funding opportunities. They're very competitive though, so that's one of the reasons for the business plan. Get some really good information, make sure we can show this is going to work so that we can get some funding to help with startup costs. If you are interested in learning more or being involved, if you feel like either you're just curious or you feel like you could contribute to this in a productive way, please feel free to join us for our community food campaign meetings. We meet on the second Mondays, so our next meeting is actually coming up on Monday at 5:15 p.m. at the Northern Plains Building on South 22nd Street. So, time's up.